Welcome to Adventures in Solitaire. Today we'll be discussing D100 Dungeon World Builder. So as mentioned in the intro, today we'll be discussing or reviewing D100 Dungeon World Builder. So what is D100 Dungeon World Builder? Well, World Builder is an open world hex crawl supplement for the D100 Dungeon core game. And as always, let's see what MK Games or the book has to say about what D100 Dungeon World Builder is. D100 Dungeon World Builder adds to the D100 Dungeon game a way to create and explore new and fascinating worlds. Your adventurer will travel the lands and interact with towns and cities and explore a vast wilderness in search of adventure. The D100 Dungeon rulebook is required. So I would like to make this entirely clear, and I'm going to refer to the core D100 Dungeon book here. In the core book, you are restricted to a single dungeon at a time. You get a quest via a random roll, and you then start a random dungeon and attempt to complete one of the many different quest objectives. There certainly were and are plenty of things to do in each dungeon you visit. There are a few things that you can do outside of the dungeon as well. This is nice, but World Builder takes that experience to an entirely different level. After you create your character, you will immediately open the World Builder supplement and begin setting up a completely open and random world. Though it is recommended that you use the updated World Builder character sheets, it is also recommended that you start with a new character when you first start playing with D100 Dungeon World Builder. Instead of a single dungeon, you will have access to many dungeons. The supplement will have you create 3 quests at the start of the game, so that means you'll have access to 3 dungeons right out of the gate. Each overworld map sheet can contain or generate a total of 25 quests, in other words dungeons, for your character to explore and complete. That's not the upper limit for World Builder though, as you can adventure into new map areas that will have the same total of quests. And we will discuss this later as well. So there is no true limit to the number of quests that you can take in the world. In the core book, you can visit an unnamed town and pick from a list of things to do there, such as shopping or spending money to build up your character in various ways. World Builder will have you create many different towns of various sizes and types. Larger towns offer a greater selection of things to do and gear to buy. In addition, these towns will offer services and additional quests for your character to partake in. The overworld map takes the form of a hex map, so this is definitely a hex crawl experience. This is one of my favorite ways, as I am sure it is to many others, to explore a pen and paper RPG. Most of what we have come to expect from hex crawl systems is present here, from terrain-based events and encounters to resource and time management. As I looked through the book for the first time, I definitely got a Barbarian Prince board game vibe. That's not a bad thing for me, and in fact it was something that only got me more excited about the system. So before I swoon too much more and turn this into a final thoughts segment, I thought it would be good to cover the individual systems of D100 Dungeon World Builder, the first of which is the setup of the game world itself. As stated before, your first step will be to create a new character. After this is done, World Builder will have you sketch out your first town and your first quests. World Builder, like other D100 Dungeon supplements, will add a few new tracking sheets for your character to track their progress and goings on in the world. You will be utilizing the hex sheet during the setup process. You will start in the gray hex of the starter hex sheet, and the terrain will be defined by your character's race. Elves will have forests, and dwarves will have mountains, for example. You will draw out the terrain as indicated by the book, and this is your home hex. After determining the type of terrain, you will then roll on the names table to generate the name for your hex. Your home hex will always start with a settlement. The book recommends that you start in a city, the city that you grew up in for theme and immersion, as opposed to randomly rolling or choosing a town of potentially lesser size. Cities provide the most opportunities for your character, and anything less can make the game a more difficult experience. You will then name your settlement using the previously mentioned name tables. Now that we have created our first city, the book will direct you to determine if roads or rivers exist in your starting hex. The book has a system to determine the percentage chance based on terrain, the type of town, if one exists, along with already existing roads and rivers in neighboring hexes. It will also give a chance for the road or river to split as well. The system is a pretty simple affair, and it is a nice addition to help it feel more natural as opposed to a more openly random system. With this, we're nearly done with the initial setup of the hex map. The book will direct you on how to both place and generate your initial 3 quests. These quests will be of differing distances and direction as well. The next step will be to adjust the lawless level to 0 on the new adventure sheet for your character, in addition to choosing a couple of new skills for your character. World Builder adds an additional 5 skills to the game, and you will get 5 points to allot to each of the 2 new skills that you will get to choose your character out of those additional 5 skills. These skills directly affect different aspects of your adventures and the overworld map specifically. And for the final step of the setup, you will need to write the beginning year 1072 on the calendar sheet along with 15 rations. It is important to note that rations and food are separate game concepts. Rations are used as your 3 meals a day on the overworld map, and food is used as per normal D100 Dungeon rules in the dungeon environments. As with the D100 Dungeon core book, you will be making extensive use of the provided sheets in World Builder. Aside from the character sheet, you have a calendar sheet and their accompanying notes. You will also have the mount sheet and the map sheet. There are a few additional areas for your character sheet, and each sheet has rules, most of which we will touch on, that of course explain their use. The map sheet and calendar sheet will be used extensively, as you will need both of them for most actions you will take in the world. As mentioned in the D100 Dungeon review, your mileage with record keeping may vary from mine. This does mean more record keeping, but I think that given what this book is offering, it is understandable and I think within reason. With that said, let's take a moment to talk about the actions that your character can take in the world of D100 Dungeon World Builder. After your character and world have been created, the first thing you'll likely be asking yourself is, what exactly can I do? Or what now? So there are, give or take, about 12 different primary actions that can be taken depending on the available features on your current hex. Each of your actions have an action point cost, or AP cost, associated with them. For each AP used in taking the action, you will spend 1 full day on your calendar. And we'll cover the calendar with a bit more depth shortly. Your character's possible actions are as follows. You may rest for 2 AP to recover a point of fatigue. Fatigue depletes when you don't rest and can cause damage if you don't rest. You can scout out an unrevealed hex before you enter it for 2 AP with a small chance of encountering an event in your character's hex. You can try to forage for food for 1 AP up to a maximum of 3 times while you remain in the current hex. So this kind of simulates you kind of exploring and searching for food and just kind of running out of options and needing to move on, either because you didn't find anything and the area is dry, or because you've got all the game that you can get. There is a table for percentile modifiers for foraging, and you can choose to forage by harvesting, trapping, or hunting. Each of these have different skill and attribute requirements attached to them. You can also attempt to fish for the cost of 1 AP. You must have a fishing rod, and the chance of success is completely based off of your fishing skill and dexterity attribute. You must, of course, be near a water source to take this action. You may attempt to fish a maximum of 3 times, similar to the foraging action, in the current hex before your sources of fish run dry. You may attempt a quest if your hex contains a quest location. This costs 0 AP, as the timer in the dungeon can now affect the overland days. So each time you cycle a time track in the dungeon, you'll advance 1 day for the character. The good news is that rations are not used while in the dungeon. The calendar will simply advance. You can search for a cart for the cost of 1 AP. This action simulates your character searching for passersby in hopes to hitch a ride on a cart or caravan. If you succeed in flagging down a ride, you can reduce the AP cost of moving to your destination by 3 AP. You may only attempt to find a cart once, so if you fail, you'll have to hoof it. In addition, the ride will not come free and will cost a variable amount of gold. This can, however, be haggled down with a successful haggle test, which is one of those new skills we had talked about earlier. You can do a simple move from your current hex to a new hex. The AP cost is variable as it is dependent upon the terrain and features such as road and rivers of the hex your character currently resides within. So you won't be having to worry about the mountain that you're going to be going into. You'll have to worry about the mountain that you're moving from. You cannot, however, move into an unexplored hex. So you will need to take a scout action on an unexplored hex before you travel to it. You will also need to roll for a chance of a random event based on your current hex before ending the day and taking your action. Similar to the card action, you can request the lay of the land from any available local populace for 1 AP. This simulates asking someone about a distant or unexplored hex. You may choose any hex on the map. The chance of success, like many of their previous skills, is based on the features of your current hex. So it would be much harder, for example, to find it in a lonely forest versus the streets of a bustling city. If you can imagine, you're not going to find very many people in a forest to help you along, versus while you're standing in a city, you'll probably find somebody that might be able to help you out with what you're looking for information in the area that you're looking at. The distance of the chosen hex is also a factor. The farther on out, the less likely it is that somebody's going to know about it. If you succeed, then like the scout action, you will reveal all of the features of the hex. If you fail, you will force a mandatory random event. You may also search for news of quests for the cost of 1 AP. This may only be attempted once in your current hex, and when you explore for news of quests, you may choose any explored or generated hex as the target of the action. This will be based on your current hex's features also. When you're out making your way in the world, you may find it useful to make camp. This action costs 2 AP and can only be done once while your character remains in his current hex. The camp is a permanent addition to the world map and may be used to perform a more limited version of before your next quest action that you may be familiar with from the original D100 Dungeon rule set. So this is a nice way to make things easier on yourself in key areas of the traveled world. And last but not least, you can take a camp settlement action. This costs 1 AP and may only be taken once while your character is in the hex. With this action, you can consult the settlements table to see what options are available when taking it before your next quest action. There will be far more options available in a city versus your meager camp, as an example. This is what is meant by a limited before your next quest action. On the topic of settlements, some settlements always offer certain goods and services, while others will have a % chance for your character to find them within the settlement. The good news is that once you find the service by rolling successfully on a percentile roll, the service will always be available. Think of this as finding a reclusive craftsman or a back alley merchant specializing in a certain trade. We might also briefly touch on crime and punishment within settlements while we're at it. Each settlement has a lawless level that reflects how often your character has broken the law. After your character has done what they intended to do in town, they must make a forced lawless roll as long as their lawless level is 1 or above. This takes the form of rolling a D10. If you roll at or below the level of the law, then an event will occur and you'll be forced to deal with the consequences. Consequences will vary based on how high the character's current lawless level is. This can manifest itself in a variety of ways. To name a few, you can serve jail time, be entered into slavery, and, even as a final measure, hung in the local gallows. Each settlement also has a lawless modifier that can make it easier or harder to get away with breaking the law. You will apply this modifier to your die roll when making the forced lawless roll. Settlements have the capability of offering all of the services that we're used to for a D100 Dungeon. This also includes services offered in the different supplement books that are available. Those services include training, healing, item repair, buying and selling, magic tuition, empire building, witchery, and artisan services. The D100 Dungeon World Book also has a variety of new items as well. These include fishing rods, lines, and baits, character rations, saddlebags, and with that, you guessed it, mounts. Horses come at a cost of 1,500 gold at settlements, and we now have the ability to travel the world map in style. So I think it's worth taking a moment to talk about available mounts and how they work. Settlements will offer horses, but the rest of the mounts must be found in one way or another. In other words, events. There are quite a few mounts to discover, as you can see. These range from mountain goat, camels, war horses, and all the way up to giant eagles or war mammoths. You're allowed to own multiple maps, and they each eat as much as you do in any given day. So you do have to be careful if you have a dream of a caravan of mounts traversing the great unknown. That caravan may lead your character and his mounts to starvation. Mounts also grant an additional action that your character can take each day. This new action is the ride action. The move action, if successful, or the ride action, reduces the AP of the move by 3 AP. Failure of the action results in a 2 AP reduction instead of 3, so this is still better than the standard move, but it will be at the cost of your character falling off the mount and taking damage, again, if they fail that roll. Each of these mounts have their own uses and benefits. The Giant Eagle can, for example, ignore riding penalties and ignores eaten, stolen, and lost mount events, which is exceptionally handy. Additionally, up to 4 saddlebags may be equipped to a mount to allow for a few additional items to be carried by the player. It is also important, I think, to note that mounts can have various things happen to them, such as being stolen, as mentioned before with the Eagle, that it could avoid some of those things while you're in the dungeon. There are ways, however, to help mitigate this risk, again, the Eagle being one of them. So there are a great many things to occupy your character's time, as well as to lighten their purse strings. So it might be wise to find time to help cover these expenses. Having said that, when you are shopping in towns, you can choose to haggle for the chosen service you're using. Success results in lower prices, while failure would then reasonably result in higher prices. You often find yourself headed to towns to gear up and recuperate, in addition to finding much needed work in the form of quests. On the topic of quests, D100 Dungeon World Builder has around 8 pages dedicated to generating new hexes once you have scouted them out or successfully requested the lay of the land. This process is very similar to the process that we covered when setting up the initial home hex. For that reason, we will not cover that in detail. I have personally tabbed this area for frequent reference. As mentioned in the beginning of the review, there is a cap of 25 quests per world map. Once you have reached this cap, you will need to ready yourself to venture overseas and discover new lands. There is a 100 gold piece cost for the character and an additional 50 gold piece cost for each mount that you wish to take along with you. Once you leave the edge of your map, you will then place a new map next to it and travel until you hit land. From there, you'll generate a new hex as you would for the scout action, and your adventures can continue in a new faraway land. You can also have your character tackle adventures or campaigns from other D100 Dungeon supplement books. This will also require you heading out to sea with the same costs and needs associated with discovering those new lands. You will leave your map sheet and draw an arrow with the adventure or campaign label, and will then return to that spot once you have had your fill of adventuring in foreign lands. With all of the questing and traveling, it's probably best to talk about the calendar sheet or system and see how that works. Every individual calendar sheet tracks an entire year of your character's life, and with D100 Dungeon World Builder, your character will now age. There will be benefits and consequences to aging as well. When you pull out a new sheet to start tracking a new year, your character will suffer a -1 to strength and dexterity, along with gaining 2 points to your intelligence. All spellcasters rejoice. While this may get your red flags or ears up at first, I think it's worth realizing that you will be given many opportunities to advance your attributes over the course of a year. In addition, there is always training that you can take as well. A year in D100 Dungeon is not the standard year, as it covers a total of 360 days. This is still quite a chunk of time for a year to pass. Every time you spend an AP or the game directs you to spend a day, you must eat a ration for each of those APs. For each a day that goes by that you fail to eat, your character will suffer -1 die 3 in HP loss. As part of the map system, D100 Dungeon World Builder also has a concept called Trigger Days. Trigger Days are special events that can happen on those specific days. There are a total of 6 trigger events, and they are as follows. Your character can grow old, as we discussed earlier. There are various religious days where the gods seem to be more vigilant. When making event rolls, you'll now take a -10 to your rolls. These are days where things are more likely to be in your character's favor, as low rolls on the event tables tend to offer better events. The balance of the world would not be complete, however, if there were not days where evil will rear its ugly head. These days are called satanic days. They work as religious days, but instead of a -10, you'll be taking a +10 modifier instead. What fun. There are also disease and poison triggers that function much like they would on the character sheet for D100 Dungeon. When these days trigger, you'll have to make poison and disease checks for your character should they have been poisoned or perhaps suffer from a disease. Adding to the dark fantasy element are days of the full moon, where there is a small chance that a werewolf might appear. And last but not least are guild triggers. On these days, your guild fees will come due, and you will be expected to pay those fees or immediately lose your guild status. There will also be times where you'll be required to track time-sensitive events. World Builder will have you circle these days and add arrows to help remind you to check against these as you play or resume your gameplay sessions. In addition, each time you circle a date, you will have a separate sheet that is paired with a calendar that you will use to record the details of these circled events. So let's talk a little bit about events and tables. The D100 Dungeon Worldbook has its fair share of something new to the series, events. Events are something that your character will consistently run into as they're exploring the world. They are detailed descriptions of unique encounters and, well, events. They're well thought out as well, and some of them can daisy chain off to other events in the book, such as when your character breaks a law and is caught, for example. There are so many events in this book. The events section is by far the largest section of the book, outside of the rules themselves. In my printing of the book, events range from page 37 to page 68. If you're keeping track, that's 31 pages of events. And if you've got D100 Dungeon already, then that should definitely open your eyes a little bit, because that's by far one of the largest chunks that we've had dedicated to something like this. This is one of my favorite features in the book. And while I am showing quick takes in front of you, I don't want to go over these too much, as I feel that it would take some of the fun and excitement in the discovery of the events and encounters that you can have in the book. These are not just random encounters either. Most of them are not. Just as a taste, you will stumble upon new guilds to join, weather and terrain events, encounters with the local populace, and much, much more. I feel like this was a well thought out and much needed addition to the book. So much so that I now wish for a tome of these events to add to what we already have. Not only that, but maybe to add existing quests in the main book or some of the supplements as well. While the core book and supplements do have some of these systems, having a tome that adds to the already rich amount of material in the cities would be very welcome. This is not a complaint, however. This is much more about, wow, wouldn't it be cool fan nerd moment for me? Anyway, moving on from here. As with all the other books in this series, D100 Dungeon World Builder adds some new tables. I do think that it's worth mentioning that the majority of the tables for World Builder are for creating the lived-in world that you will soon uncover. If you are looking for large tables of treasure or new races or classes, then you'll want to look at purchasing one or more of the other supplements readily available from MK Games. I do not see this as a drawback though, as the book is able to focus on giving us the new content that I think most of us want. Content that allows us to live and adventure in the vast world outside of the dungeons. As stated, though most of the tables are for the world map, it does have the core event tables, names list, new items table, quest reward table, random treasures, settlement tables, and terrain table. But there's more. There are 9 pages of quests with in-depth and detailed descriptions. That's 9 pages in addition to the 30 events that can happen. And there are 2 pages of smaller side quests also, and a couple of pages of new unique items and gear to discover. So we have covered a lot here, and I think now would be a good time to talk about my closing thoughts. One of the things that I find missing from a lot of these dungeon delves in board games or adventure book series, what have you, are the things that are happening between the dungeons. Most of what your adventurers will spend their time doing is not in the dungeon, but outside of the dungeon. It's like we have taken our favorite movies and only watched the 5 minutes of action scenes, and we lost out on all of the rest, the connective tissue and story that really gives strength and foundation to those scenes. There is so much in our role-playing games that we do that do not involve dungeons. So when I saw a book called D100 Dungeon World Builder and saw a hex map on the cover, I immediately leapt for joy and then stopped myself, lest my excitement end up being hope misplaced. Thankfully, it was not. I waited, as most of us do, for my purchase from DriveThruRPG to arrive at my doorstep. When it finally arrived, I poured through the pages of the new edition of my D100 Dungeon family of books. My first concern was how the world would be created, and this was laid to rest when I saw that there was a semi-natural system for roads and terrain features. Until now, I was left with fan-created content and sometimes published non-canon content that I either felt was too obtuse and time-consuming or just too simple and or random for my liking. I found that there were plenty of events and things for my character to run into and do. I could already see stories playing out in my head as my adventurer wandered the lands, righting wrongs and putting an end to evils. Our character starts out in their hometown, and I could see the Lord of the Rings Frodo and Sam moment where my character would be full of excitement as they left to explore the so far uncharted and unmapped areas outside of their hometown. I thought of reasons that the town was so secluded and in the dark to the world at large, and why was the world not mapped out. And I was excited at the prospect of being a sort of adventuring cartographer of sorts. The adventures I would have were no longer just in gloomy dungeons, but also in the mostly bright world outside. There were great forests, mountainous terrains, plains, and even dark and dreaded swamps to traverse. Who knew what I could run into? For the first time, I actually went out and bought a pen set for adding color to the maps of the world that my character would be uncovering. When D100 Dungeon first came out, it was billed as more of an adventure game, or a dungeon delving game. With the addition of all the other supplements, and more specifically, the World Builder supplement, it is dangerously close in a good way to becoming what I would now be tempted to bill an RPG experience. The only missing piece here, campaign and adventure books excluded, are random plots and evolving relationships, etc. Those parts which bring the cities to life, where what you do can affect the course of a town or even maybe a nation. However, these are very bold and extensive systems to incorporate, and I feel that adding those systems to the current World Builder iteration would be almost too much. I could see a time in the future where something like this would absolutely help expand what World Builder does. But I think it stands as one of the most sought after and impactful additions to the D100 Dungeon system, given the numerous features that it offers in a world outside of the dungeons that we have been confined to for so very long. Not just in D100 Dungeon, but in other systems and board games in our libraries as well. If you are lucky enough to have the other core gameplay supplements, then the options you will have available to your character are almost too great to keep in one's head. The World Book does a fine job with just the core D100 Dungeon book, but it does take all of the previous expansions into account and makes use of those features if you have them available. The options you have access to in towns will definitely be expanded. I cannot wait to see if or what MK games will release utilizing and enhancing this new hex crawl system. However, if D100 Dungeon supplements were to stop here, I think this system would feel complete, and I think that it speaks volumes for what Mark Knight has accomplished with D100 Dungeon World Builder. If I were to choose one supplement that would have the biggest overall impact to the core D100 Dungeon rule set, World Builder and the experience that it offers would definitely be it. It dramatically changes the way that I look at the system as a whole. As I've stated before, D100 Dungeon has a home next to my desk where it belongs, and I have happily added the D100 Dungeon World Builder supplement to that collection. So, with that being said, as always, if you have watched this far, or not, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll look forward to seeing you again. Thanks. Bye-bye.